The church smelled like leather and rain-soaked earth. 23 iron skulls stood in formation inside the small rural chapel outside Billings, their boots silent against worn wooden floors that had held Montana's faithful for 80 years. Outside, their motorcycles lined the gravel lot like metal tombstones chrome, catching the gray October light filtering through storm clouds that refused to break. Inside, Maria Reeves rested in a coffin, draped with black velvet, surrounded by white roses that seemed too pure for the violence that had taken her 4 days ago on Route 9. Carter Reeves stood closest to the coffin, his jaw locked tight enough to crack teeth. 6'3" of weathered muscle and scar tissue, gray beard, trimmed military sharp the way Marines learned at Parris Island 50 years back. The president patch on his leather vest felt heavier than it ever had, weighing him down like an anchor trying to pull him through the floor and 6 feet deeper. Maria was supposed to be untouchable. She was his wife under club protection, under his protection specifically, and now she was cold wood and silence, and the smell of roses he'd never be able to stomach again. He hadn't slept in 4 days, hadn't eaten in 2. His right hand trembled slightly, first time since Quezon in '72, when mortar fire had rained down for 16 hours straight, and he'd held a position because retreat meant death for everyone. This felt worse. Combat you could fight. Grief just crushed you slow. The pastor cleared his throat nervously, glancing at the bikers like he expected them to explode at any moment. His collar looked too tight, his face too pale. "We'll now have a moment of silence before wait." The voice was small, high-pitched, a child's voice cutting through the heavy air like a knife through leather. Every head in the chapel turned as 123 men who'd killed and bled and survived turning toward the doorway with the kind of attention combat teaches you never to lose. A little girl stood framed in the entrance. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, maybe 80 pounds soaking wet, wearing jeans 2 sizes too big, held up with a rope belt in a faded purple jacket with the right sleeve torn halfway off. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around a face streaked with dirt and dried tears that had cut clean tracks through the grime. Her sneakers were held together with duct tape, the kind of repair job you do when you've got nothing else and winter's coming fast. Nobody moved. The girl's eyes, too old for her face, haunted in ways that made Carter's chest tighten with recognition, fixed on the coffin like nothing else existed in the world. "Who the hell?" Derek Morrison started forward from Carter's left. The lieutenant's lean frame coiled tight, but Carter held up one hand without looking away from the girl. Derek froze mid-step. 40 years of friendship meant Derek knew when to stop asking questions. The girl walked down the center aisle between the rows of bikers. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one measured like she was walking through landmines. She didn't look at the men on either side, didn't acknowledge 23 bikers who could crush her without thinking. She only looked at the coffin, and something in her face made Carter think of soldiers he'd seen in Vietnam, the ones who'd watched their entire squad die and kept walking because stopping meant accepting it was real. When she reached the coffin, she threw both arms around the polished wood and pressed her cheek against its surface, her small body shaking. "No, not yet." The pastor shifted his weight, Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. "Young lady, I'm afraid we need to." I said, "Not yet." Her voice cracked but didn't waver. She squeezed the coffin tighter, her fingers going white with pressure. Carter felt something twist in his chest, something that hadn't moved since Maria died. He stepped forward carefully, the way you approach a wounded animal that might bolt or bite. "Hey kid, what's your name?" She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him, except for the slight hitch in her breathing. "Sophie." Carter crouched down to her level, his knees protesting. Age was a bastard that way. "Sophie, how did you know Maria?" The girl's shoulders shook harder, her whole body trembling against the coffin. "She saved me. 3 months ago, she found me sleeping behind a dumpster at the grocery store on 5th Street and bought me food. She kept coming back every few days. She was the only person who—" Her voice broke completely. The chapel was silent except for the sound of the girl crying against the coffin, and Carter's throat felt like someone had filled it with broken glass. He knew that grocery store. Maria had volunteered at the food bank 2 blocks over every Tuesday for the last 8 years. "Sophie, I know this is hard, but we need to," I promised her. Sophie finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed but fierce, burning with something Carter recognized from the mirror. On his worst days, the kind of determination that comes from having nothing left to lose. I promised I wouldn't let anyone close the coffin until they knew the truth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carter heard leather creak as bikers shifted, heard someone's breath catch. From behind him, Walter Brennan's voice cut through the tension. Vic, the club's treasurer, for 5 years, always the practical one, always thinking 2 steps ahead. What truth? Sophie reached into her jacket pocket with trembling hands. She pulled out a small silver locket on a thin chain, the kind of jewelry that came from pawn shops or dead grandmothers. Her fingers shook as she opened it, and a tiny speaker crackled to life with a sound that made Carter's skin go cold. Maria's voice filled the chapel, and Carter's world stopped. Sophie, baby, if you're hearing this, something happened to me. I need you to protect me until they know who betrayed us. Don't let them bury me until Carter knows. Someone in the club, someone we trust, they're planning something terrible. I found proof. But if I'm dead, it means they found me first. Promise me, Sophie. Promise you will tell them. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy enough to crush bones. Carter's hands curled into fists, his vision blurring red at the edges. He felt his heart hammering against his ribs, like it was trying to break free, like it wanted to finish what grief had started. What did she just say? Sophie clutched the locket to her chest, her small face set with determination that shouldn't exist in someone so young. She said someone betrayed her. Someone in your club. That's impossible. Derek moved closer, his face twisted with something between anger and disbelief. He'd known Maria since she and Carter got together 16 years ago, had been at their wedding, had held Carter's hand when Carter's father died 3 years back. Maria died because the warlord's MC forced her off Route 9. Everyone knows that. This kid's making shit up for attention. I'm not, Sophie's shout echoed off the chapel walls, bouncing back at them with the force of absolute conviction. She pointed at Derek with a shaking finger, and every biker in the room went rigid. I was there. I saw what happened. Carter couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel, and he felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been holding him together for 4 days suddenly giving way. You saw the crash, Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face, cutting new tracks through the dirt. I was hiding under the bridge, the one near the old mill on Route 9. I sleep there sometimes when it's cold because the concrete holds heat from the day. I heard motorcycles coming fast, really loud, and I looked up through the gaps in the bridge boards. She squeezed her eyes shut like she was trying to block out the memory, but her voice stayed steady. There were 2 bikes. Maria was in front on her blue Harley with the silver flames. She was going fast, but the other one was faster. It came up beside her and her voice caught, and it forced her toward the guardrail. She tried to swerve, but there was nowhere to go. The bike hit her side and she went over the edge. I heard the crash. Metal and glass, and then nothing. Just silence. The chapel erupted. Bikers shouted over each other, voices rising in anger and confusion. Someone threw a hymnal that smashed against the far wall, pages fluttering down like dying birds. Carter heard chairs scraping, heard fists pounding against wood, heard the sound of men who'd been brothers for years suddenly turning on each other because trust was the first casualty when betrayal showed its face. Enough. Carter's roar cut through the chaos like a chainsaw through deadwood. Everyone froze, 22 men going silent at once, because when the president spoke with that tone, you listened or you left. He stood slowly, his full height towering over the small girl who refused to let go of his wife's coffin. When he spoke again, his voice was cold steel. Sophie, look at me. She did. Her eyes met his without flinching, without fear, and Carter saw something in them that made his decision. Are you telling me that someone in this club, someone wearing our patch, someone Maria trusted murdered my wife? Sophie nodded. She knew. That's why she gave me the locket. She said if anything happened to her, I had to make sure you found out before they could cover it up. Carter turned to face his brothers. 22 men stared back at him, men he'd ridden with for years, men he'd bled with, men he'd trusted with his life and his secrets and his club. One of them had killed Maria. The thought sat in his gut like swallowed glass. He looked at the coffin, at his wife's final resting place that couldn't rest yet, and then back at Sophie's terrified, determined face. Nobody touches this coffin. The funeral's postponed. We're taking this back to the clubhouse. He pointed at the pastor who looked like he might faint. You keep this room locked. Nobody comes in or out until I say so. The pastor nodded frantically. Carter looked down at Sophie, and something in his expression must have changed because her shoulders relaxed slightly. You're coming with us. You're going to tell us everything you saw, every single detail. Sophie nodded and finally released her grip on the coffin. As the iron skulls filed out of the chapel in tense silence, Carter took one last look at Maria's coffin. The white roses seemed to mock him. I'll find who did this, even if it destroys the club, even if it destroys me. Behind him, Sophie slipped her small hand into his scarred, tattooed one. Her voice was barely a whisper. She said you believe me. She said you choose the truth no matter what. Carter squeezed her hand gently, carefully, aware of how fragile she was and how much courage it took to stand in a room full of dangerous men and tell them their brother was a killer. The truth was about to burn everything to the ground. The clubhouse sat 15 miles outside Billings, a sprawling compound of concrete and steel, surrounded by chain-link fence and razor wire that caught the afternoon light like broken teeth. The main building had been a warehouse once before the Iron Skulls claimed it in the 90s and turned it into something halfway between a fortress and a home. Guard towers at each corner, security cameras covering every approach. A place built by men who understood that enemies came in many forms and trust was a currency that devalued fast. Sophie stood in the center of the meeting room, dwarfed by the long oak table and high ceilings. 23 bikers formed a semicircle around her, their faces ranging from skeptical to furious to unreadable. The room smelled like motor oil and cigarette smoke, and the particular tension that comes right before violence breaks loose. Carter sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped in front of him. He'd washed his face in the clubhouse bathroom, changed nothing else. The exhaustion sat on him like a second skin. Play it again. Sophie's fingers fumbled with the locket. Maria's voice crackled out once more, filling the room with words recorded from beyond the grave. When it finished, the silence felt alive with tension, crackling like electricity before a lightning strike. Could be faked. Someone muttered from the back. Carter didn't turn to identify the speaker. It's her voice. I'd know it anywhere. Derek leaned forward, elbows on the table. His face was haggard, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Even if it's real, the kid could have stolen it, could have found it after the crash. Doesn't mean Maria actually gave it to her. Sophie's face flushed red anger, cutting through her fear. She did give it to me. 2 weeks before she died, she came to the bridge and said she needed someone she could trust. Someone outside the club. Vic spoke up from this middle of the table, his voice carrying the reasonable tone he used when proposing budgets and expenditures. Walter Brennan Vic, to everyone who knew him, had been treasurer for 5 years, handled every dollar that moved through the club, knew the books better than anyone. He was 52, graying at the temples, always dressed slightly better than everyone else, like he was going to a business meeting instead of a biker clubhouse. Why would Maria trust some random street kid with something this important? Sophie's voice shook but held firm. Because I had nothing to lose. She said everyone else could be bought or threatened or hurt, but nobody knew about me. Nobody cared about me. That made me safe. Carter felt that twist in his chest again, the one that made breathing difficult. It sounded exactly like something Maria would say. She'd always had a soft spot for lost causes, broken things that needed fixing. She'd fixed him once, pulled him back from the edge, when he'd been ready to ride his bike off a cliff and call it an accident back in 2009. Found him at a dive bar outside Bozeman, drunk and suicidal, and sat down beside him like she had all the time in the world. 3 hours later, he'd been sober and in love, though it took him another year to admit it. Tell us about the crash, everything you remember. Sophie closed her eyes, her whole body tense like she was bracing for impact. It was late, maybe 11 at night. I was trying to sleep under the bridge, but I heard engines. 2 motorcycles really loud. I looked up through the gaps in the bridge boards and saw them coming down Route 9. Describe the bikes. Derek interrupted, his voice sharp. Sophie's eyes opened, fixing on him with surprising steadiness for a 10-year-old facing down a room full of dangerous men. The first one was Maria's, dark blue Harley with silver flames on the tank. I recognized it because she always parked it near the diner on 5th Street, where I sometimes got food from the dumpster behind the kitchen. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. The second bike was black. Bigger, It came up fast on her left side. What happened next, Carter's knuckles had gone white where his hands pressed together. Sophie's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling too fast. The black bike swerved into her, just slammed into her side while they were going full speed. Maria tried to brake, but there was no time. She hit the guardrail and went over. The drop is 40 feet to the rocks in the creek below. I heard the crash, metal and glass, and this sound like she stopped, swallowed hard, and then nothing, just silence. Did you see the rider's face? No. Full helmet with a dark visor. Someone near the back spoke up. But I saw the vest. Black leather with the iron skulls patch on the back. The skull and crossbones with the chain border. Same patch everyone in this room is wearing. Vic stood up his chair, scraping loud against the concrete floor. Everyone in this room has that patch. Doesn't tell us anything. Could be anyone. Hell, could be stolen colors. The warlords have tried that before. The bike does tell us something. Sophie opened her eyes, and there was steel in her young voice that made Carter think of soldiers twice her age. It had something painted on the gas tank. Red letters. I couldn't read all of it from under the bridge, but I saw a war and some numbers. Maybe a 1 and a 7. The room went dead silent. Carter's head snapped toward Derek, and he saw his lieutenant's face go pale. Who rides a black bike with war on the tank? Derek's voice came out strangled. That could be anybody. Lots of bikes have custom paint jobs. Not in this club. Carter stood slowly, his chair groaning under the shift in weight. He was 62, but he still moved like the Marine he'd been at 22, still carried himself like violence was always an option and often the best one. Only one person here has warrior painted on their tank, and the number 17 for the year they joined. Every eye in the room turned to the back corner where Tommy Wade sat frozen in his chair. 28 years old, wiry and nervous, with a scar across his left eyebrow from a bar fight 3 years ago. He did bike maintenance for the club, new engines better than most mechanics, always seemed like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Tommy's chair scraped backward, the sound too loud in the silence. I wasn't anywhere near Route 9 that night. Where were you? Home. I was home watching TV. Anyone with you? Tommy's mouth opened and closed. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air in the clubhouse. No, but that doesn't mean nothing. Carter started walking toward him, slow and deliberate. Each step measured. Predator approaching prey. My wife is dead, Unishain. This girl says she saw an Iron Skull's bike with the WAR on the tank. Your bike is the only one that fits. I'm being set up. Tommy's voice climbed to a shout, panic overriding self-preservation. Someone's trying to frame me. This is bullshit. You can't believe some homeless kid over. Then where's your bike now? Vic's question cut through Tommy's protest like a blade. Tommy's face went gray. In the garage, where it always is. Let's go look at it. The group moved as one toward the garage attached to the clubhouse. Tommy stumbled along with them, protesting the whole way, his voice getting higher and more desperate with each word. The garage smelled like motor oil and exhaust tools hanging on pegboards, with the kind of organization that spoke to routine and ritual. 6 bikes sat in their designated spots, each one customized and personal as a fingerprint. Carter circled Tommy's bike slowly. The gas tank was freshly painted, solid black, glossy, and perfect, not a scratch or chip anywhere. You repainted it. 2 days ago, I just wanted a new look. Change of pace. 2 days after Maria died. Carter grabbed Tommy by the vest and slammed him against the wall hard enough to knock wind from his lungs. Tommy's head bounced off concrete and his eyes went wide with fear. Where were you the night she died? I told you home. Sophie stepped forward, staring at Tommy's face. Her voice came out small but certain, the kind of certainty that comes from memory burned too deep to fade. The scar. I remember the scar on his eyebrow. When he took his helmet off after the crash, I saw it under the streetlight before he drove away. Tommy's face crumbled, his legs buckled, and only Carter's grip kept him upright. No, she's lying. She has to be lying. Please, Carter, you know me. You know I wouldn't, but Carter had already seen the truth written in Tommy's eyes, seen it in the way his whole body sagged with the weight of guilt he'd been carrying for 4 days. The betrayal was real, and it was just beginning. Tommy's knees gave out completely. Carter held him against the wall with one hand, his forearm pressed across Tommy's throat just hard enough to make breathing difficult but not impossible. Not yet. Talk, right now, or I let every man here take a turn. I can't. Tommy gasped, his voice coming out strangled and desperate. They'll kill me if I talk. Please, you don't understand. I'll kill you if you don't. Carter pressed harder, watching Tommy's face go red. The garage erupted with shouts. Bikers surged forward, ready to tear Tommy apart with their bare hands, years of brotherhood turning to murder in the space of a heartbeat. Derek grabbed two of them, his lean strength enough to hold them back temporarily. Let Carter handle this. Carter released the pressure slightly. Tommy sucked in air, coughing. Who gave the order? Tommy's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape that didn't exist. His voice came out in desperate bursts between gasping breaths. If I tell you I'm dead anyway, you'll kill me here or they'll kill me out there. Either way, I'm dead. You're dead right now unless you start talking. Carter's voice dropped to something below a whisper, the kind of quiet that was more threatening than any shout. Maria was your sister in this club. We swore oaths. We bled together. And you killed her for money. So talk before I decide your death should take days instead of seconds. 50,000. Tommy screamed it, the words exploding out of him. They offered me $50,000. I've got a kid, man, a daughter. My ex took me back to court and child support is crushing me. I was going to lose my apartment. I was going to be on the street. I was desperate. Sophie spoke up from behind the wall of bikers, her voice cutting through the noise. You killed someone's wife for money. Someone who probably would have helped you if you just asked. Tommy's face crumpled completely. Tears streamed down his cheeks, mixing with the sweat and snot running from his nose. Maria did help me. Last year when my ex dragged me to court, Maria loaned me $3,000 for the lawyer. She never even asked for it back. Said family takes care of family. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the garage floor. Carter releasing him slowly. God. Oh God, what did I do? What the fuck did I do? Carter crouched in front of him, close enough to smell the fear, sweat, and desperation. Last chance, Tommy. Who hired you? I don't know his real name. Tommy looked up with hollow eyes, the eyes of a man who'd already accepted he was dead. He contacted me through encrypted messages on Signal, called himself the broker. Said someone high up in the club needed Maria gone because she'd found evidence of something big. Vic stepped forward, his face twisted with disbelief. Bullshit. Nobody in this club works with weapons deals. Tommy interrupted, his voice gaining strength now that the dam had broken. Cartel connections. Trafficking routes. The broker said Maria had found evidence that one of us was running shadow operations, that she was going to expose everything. Derek's voice cut in cold and analytical. We run clean operations. Gambling, some protection, money, bike repairs. We don't touch drugs or guns. That's been club policy since Carter's father founded this charter in 1980. That's what I thought too. Tommy wiped his face with shaking hands. But the broker knew things. He knew about club finances I'd never seen in meetings. He knew about properties we supposedly own that aren't in any official records. He knew about shipments coming through the docks that nobody ever mentioned at the table. Carter felt ice spreading through his veins, cold and heavy. What kind of shipments, I don't know. He never said specifically. Just that Maria found invoices, receipts, something concrete that proved one of us was running a weapons operation. She was going to blow it wide open. Bring everything down. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. He said if I didn't do it, they'd find someone else. And my daughter would accidentally end up in the system while I had a fatal accident at the shop. He described exactly how he'd make it look. Grinding wheel malfunction, nobody's fault, very tragic. Sophie stepped forward, pulling something from her jacket pocket. Every head turned. In her small hand was a USB drive, bright red, attached to a keychain shaped like a motorcycle. She gave me more than the locket. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Sophie held up the drive, her hand steady despite everything. Maria said this proves everything, but she encrypted it. She said only Carter would know the password, and I should only give it to him if something happened to her. Carter took the drive carefully, his calloused fingers gentle. The red plastic caught the garage's fluorescent light. Did she tell you what's on it? Names, dates, transaction records, audio recordings? Sophie's voice steadied with each word like she was reciting something Maria had made her memorize. She said whoever's behind this has been stealing from the club for 2 years. Millions of dollars moving through fake accounts. She found the money trail and started gathering evidence, but they figured out what she was doing. Derek moved closer, his analytical mind already working the problem. If this is true, we're talking about someone with serious access, someone high up who handles finances or logistics. That's half the leadership table. Someone muttered from the crowd. Carter looked around the garage at faces he'd known for years, brothers he'd trusted with his life. Somewhere among them was the person who'd ordered Maria's death. Here's what happens next. Carter stood holding the USB drive up where everyone could see it. Tommy goes in the basement lockup until I decide what to do with him. Derek, I want every financial record we have pulled and ready for review. Everything from the last 3 years. Everyone else, nobody leaves the compound without my direct permission. We're on lockdown until we find who the broker is. And the funeral, Vic asked quietly. Carter looked at Sophie. She still clutched Maria's locket in her other hand, her small face set with determination that seemed impossible for someone her age. The funeral waits. Maria wanted the truth. We're going to give it to her. He held up the USB drive again, and it caught the light like a promise. Someone in this room is a traitor. Someone Maria trusted. Someone I trusted. And I'm going to find them if I have to burn this whole club to the ground. Sophie moved to stand beside him. Together they looked like vengeance waiting to happen, a grieving widower and a homeless girl bound by a dead woman's final wish. The clubhouse felt like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Midnight had come and gone. Most of the bikers had scattered to different corners of the compound, forming small groups that whispered in tight circles. Trust was fracturing like thin ice under heavy boots, hairline cracks spreading faster than anyone could track. Carter sat alone in his office, staring at the red USB drive on his desk like it might come alive and bite him. Maria's laptop was open in front of him, the cursor blinking in the password field with patient indifference. He tried her birthday 04151967 and got an error. Tried their anniversary 08222010 and got another. The date they'd first met at that dive bar outside Bozeman. Her mother's maiden name. The private nickname he'd called her that nobody else knew, Wildflower, because she'd grown beautiful in places nothing else would. Nothing worked. Each failed attempt felt like losing her all over again. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Sophie pushed the door open. She'd cleaned up. A little someone had found her an Iron Skulls t-shirt that hung to her knees and helped her wash the dirt from her face. But her eyes still carried shadows too dark for a 10-year-old, the kind of shadows that came from seeing things no child should witness. Can't sleep, nobody here trusts me. I heard them talking through the walls. They think I'm lying, that I'm working with someone to tear the club apart from inside. Are you? Sophie met his gaze without flinching, without fear. Carter had spent 15 years learning to spot liars and rats and undercover cops. This kid looked him straight in the eye with the kind of honesty that couldn't be faked. No. Sit. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sophie climbed into it, her feet dangling above the floor. For a long moment, neither spoke. The compound was quiet except for the distant sound of voices and the occasional rev of an engine being worked on in the garage. Maria talked about you a lot, Sophie finally said. Carter's throat tightened. She said you were the toughest man she'd ever met, but also the fairest. Said when you gave your word, it was solid as concrete. She said you'd built this club on loyalty and honor, and that you'd never let anyone corrupt it. Her voice dropped lower. That's why she was so scared. Because she knew what finding out the truth would do to you. She knew it would break something inside you. Did she say who she suspected? No. She said she couldn't tell me in case they got to me first. The less I knew, the safer I'd be. Sophie pulled her knees up to her chest, making herself smaller. But she was terrified those last 2 weeks. She kept looking over her shoulder. She stopped coming to see me as often. When she gave me the USB drive, her hands were shaking so bad she could barely work the clasp on the keychain. Carter picked up the drive, turning it over in his fingers. The plastic was smooth and cool, completely ordinary. No way to tell it held evidence that might destroy his club. I can't crack the password. She said I'd know it. Something only we shared. He looked at Sophie's young face. I've tried everything. Every important date, every private joke, every meaningful place. Nothing works. A shout from outside made them both jump. Carter was on his feet instantly, grabbing the pistol from his desk. Drawer. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. No, Sophie stood too, her small frame vibrating with determination. Wherever you go, I go. Maria made me promise to see this through, all the way to the end. Kid. My name is Sophie. Her jaw set stubbornly, and Carter saw Maria in that expression, the same refusal to back down, the same courage that bordered on stupidity. And I'm not staying locked in a room while people fight over whether I'm telling the truth. I saw what I saw. I'm the only witness you have. Another shout cut through the night, louder this time. Carter swore under his breath. Stay behind me, don't say a word. If shooting starts, you hit the floor. Understand? Sophie nodded. They moved through the hallway together, Carter's gun held low and ready. The sounds came from the main meeting room, raised voices, something breaking the particular energy that came right before violence erupted. When they entered, they found the club split into two groups facing each other across the long table. Derek stood on one side with about 10 bikers, his face hard. Vic stood on the other with roughly equal numbers, his expression carefully neutral. The air crackled with tension. Don't trust a damn thing coming out of that child's mouth. Vic was saying, his voice loud enough to carry, but controlled enough to sound reasonable. She shows up out of nowhere with a convenient story, and suddenly we're tearing each other apart. This is exactly what our enemies would want. The story checks out. Derek shot back, his hands flat on the table. Tommy confessed. The evidence is real. Tommy's a coward who'd say anything to save his skin. Vic slammed his fist on the table hard enough to make the wood jump. For all we know, this is a setup by the warlords to destroy us from inside. They plant the kid, feed her a story, watch us implode. The warlords don't think that strategically. Derek's voice went cold. This is internal. Someone's been stealing from us, and Maria found out. Then show us the proof. Vic gestured at Carter with something that might have been frustration or might have been calculated manipulation. Show us what's on that USB drive. It's encrypted, Carter said quietly. Every eye turned to him. I haven't cracked it yet. Vic's eyes narrowed. Convenient, real convenient that the only evidence is locked behind a password nobody knows. Maybe there's nothing on that drive at all. Maybe this whole thing is careful. Carter's voice dropped to permafrost, the tone he'd used in Vietnam when warning someone they were about to make a fatal mistake. Finish that sentence and we're going to have a problem. Vic held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away first. But he added quietly, his voice just loud enough to plant doubt. I'm just saying what half this room is thinking. We're cannibalizing ourselves over accusations from a homeless kid. Sophie stepped forward before Carter could stop her. Her voice came out quiet but cut through the tension like a blade through silk. I'm what people call white trash. My mom overdosed on fentanyl when I was 6 years old in a motel room in Great Falls. I watched her die because I was too small to reach the phone to call for help. The room went dead silent. Sophie's hands clenched at her sides, but her voice stayed steady. I sleep rough because my foster father liked to use me as a punching bag when he'd been drinking, which was every night. I ran 8 months ago. Maria found me behind that dumpster, and she was the first adult in 2 years who didn't try to hurt me or use me or ignore me. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. So yeah, I'm just a kid, but I'm a kid who watched your president's wife get murdered, and I'm a kid who promised to help find her killer. You can believe me or not, but I'm not leaving until this is finished. Carter felt something shift in his chest, pride mixing with rage, mixing with grief in a combination that made breathing difficult. This kid had more courage than half the men in this room. Meeting's over. His voice carried absolute authority. Everyone gets some sleep. Tomorrow we start digging into every financial transaction from the last 3 years. Every shipment, every deposit, every dollar that moved through this club. And if we find nothing, Vic challenged. Carter's hand tightened on his pistol. Then we keep looking, because someone killed Maria and I'm going to find them. Dawn broke gray and cold over the compound. Carter had been awake all night staring at financial records until the numbers blurred together into meaningless patterns. Nothing obvious jumped out, no massive withdrawals, no suspicious payments appearing out of nowhere. Whoever was stealing from the club knew how to hide their tracks, knew the systems well enough to make everything look legitimate. Sophie had fallen asleep in the corner of his office around 3 a.m., curled up in an old leather chair with a blanket someone had brought her. She looked even smaller in sleep, her face peaceful, in a way it never was when she was awake. Carter found himself wondering what kind of life she'd had before Maria found her, what kind of hell she'd escaped from, what kind of scars she carried that nobody could see. A knock pulled him from his thoughts. Derek entered without waiting for permission, his face haggard from a sleepless night. Tech guy's ready. Leo Martinez runs a computer shop in Billings, does side work for people who need things kept quiet. If anyone can crack that USB, it's him. He trustworthy, as much as anyone right now. Derek's voice was flat, which isn't saying much. Carter gently shook Sophie awake. She startled hard, her fists coming up defensively, before her eyes focused and recognition kicked in. Easy, just me. We're taking a ride to the city. 20 minutes later, they were on the road. Carter rode his bike with Sophie clinging to his back, her small arms wrapped around his waist. Derek led the way on his own Harley, with 4 more bikers flanking them as security. The USB drive was zipped into Carter's vest pocket, pressed against his heart, where Maria's wedding photo used to rest before he'd burned it the day she died because looking at her smile had become unbearable. The highway stretched empty before them, cutting through pine forests still dark with morning shadow. The rumble of 6 motorcycles echoed off the trees, a sound Carter had loved his entire adult life. Today it sounded like a funeral march. Sophie's grip tightened whenever they took a curve too fast, but she never asked him to slow down. Kid had guts. They were 15 miles from Billings when Derek's bike swerved suddenly. Carter looked up to see 3 motorcycles blocking the road ahead. Riders dressed in black tactical gear with full helmets. No patches, no colors, nothing identifying. Ambush, Derek shouted, skidding sideways. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes bright in the morning gloom. Carter yanked his bike hard right, jumping the shallow ditch and tearing into the forest. Sophie screamed in his ear, but held on her arms, locked around him like steel cables. Behind them, the iron skulls scattered engines roaring as they dodged between trees. More bikes appeared from the forest shadows, 4, 5, 6 of them, materializing like ghosts. They'd been waiting. Someone had told them exactly where to set up, exactly when the iron skulls would be coming down this road. The helmets, Sophie shrieked over the engine noise and gunfire. Those are the same helmets, the same bikes from when Maria died. Carter's blood went cold. A bullet whined past his head and shattered bark from a pine tree 6 inches to his left. He twisted the throttle and his bike jumped forward, tires chewing through forest undergrowth. The forest floor was a nightmare of roots and rocks, but he'd been riding since he was 12 years old in Tennessee before his family moved west. His hands moved on instinct while his mind raced. Someone in the club had tipped off the attackers. Someone had told them exactly where they'd be and when. Only the leadership knew about this trip to Leo's shop. Derek pulled alongside him, gun out and firing back at their pursuers. Head for the old logging road, 2 miles north. They broke from the trees onto a dirt path barely wide enough for the bikes. The attackers followed their engines screaming. One pulled up beside Danny Kowalski and forced him into a tree. Danny went down hard, his bike cartwheeling end over end, pieces flying off in all directions. Danny's body tumbled through the undergrowth like a rag doll. "Danny," someone shouted. Carter roared back over the chaos. "Keep moving." The logging road dead-ended at an abandoned mill, the same mill near the Route 9 bridge where Maria had died. Carter skidded to a stop, Sophie tumbling off the bike. The remaining iron skulls. Carter, Derek, Sophie, and 3 others ran for the mill's entrance. Behind them, the attackers' bikes formed a semicircle, cutting off any chance of escape. Inside the mill, Carter positioned his people behind rusted machinery and rotted support beams that looked like they might collapse if you breathe on them wrong. He had his pistol with 15 rounds. Derek had a gun and a hunting knife. The others were armed with whatever they carried: a crowbar, a chain, 1 more pistol between 3 men. They were outgunned and they all knew it. "We're fucked," one of the bikers muttered. Carter checked his ammunition and tried to think of a way out that didn't end with all of them dead. "Then we get smart." He looked at Sophie, who'd pressed herself behind a structural beam. "How many bikes did you see at Maria's crash?" "Just one. Just the one that killed her. Now there's 9 out there." Carter's tactical mind started working the problem. "This isn't about revenge or cleanup. They want something specific." "The USB," Derek said, and right on cue, a voice echoed from outside. It was distorted, running through some kind of modulator that made it sound mechanical and inhuman. "Carter, we know you're in there. Send out the drive and the girl, and we let the rest of you ride away." Carter didn't answer. Sophie grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. "Don't. Wasn't planning on it," he raised his voice. "How about you come in here and take them?" Silence. "Then you're making a mistake. The people you trust are lying to you. The girl is bait. This whole thing is a setup to destroy the Iron Skulls from inside." "He's right about one thing," Derek muttered. "Someone's definitely trying to destroy us from inside." Sophie was staring out through a gap in the mill's walls, her face pale. "They're spreading out, surrounding the building." Carter checked his ammunition again. 15 rounds against 9 armed riders who clearly had no problem killing. The odds were terrible, but he'd faced terrible odds before. Vietnam had taught him that survival wasn't about having the best weapons, it was about having the will to use them. "Derek, you're with me. We're going out the back. Everyone else, you make noise here. Make them think we're all still inside." "That's suicide," someone protested. Carter looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death to fear it anymore. "Got a better idea." Silence. "Riley, Sophie, you stay here, stay low. Don't move until numb." Sophie's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I go with you. Maria trusted me with this. I'm seeing it through." Carter wanted to argue, but he saw Maria in this kid's eyes, the same stubborn courage, the same refusal to back down when backing down would be the smart choice. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say." "Deal." Sophie nodded. Outside, the attackers were closing in. Inside, Carter prepared for war. He looked at the USB drive in his vest pocket and thought about Maria, about promises made, and kept about truth that demanded blood payment. The back of the mill opened onto a ravine choked with blackberry bushes and fallen trees. Carter went first, his boots finding purchase on loose rocks that shifted under his weight. Sophie followed her small frame, slipping through gaps he had to force his way past. Derek came last, his guns sweeping back toward the mill where gunfire had just erupted, their brothers buying them time with their lives. They scrambled down the ravine as bullets chewed through rotten wood above them. Shouts echoed between the trees. Someone screamed one of theirs, or an attacker, Carter couldn't tell. At the bottom, a narrow stream cut through the forest, the water icy cold even in October. Carter splashed through it, Sophie's hand locked in his, pulling her along. They ran for 10 minutes straight, branches whipping their faces until the sounds of fighting faded behind them, and Carter's lungs burned like he'd inhaled fire. He finally stopped gasping for air, his body reminding him he was 62 and not the 22-year-old Marine who could run all day. "We need to keep moving. They'll track us. Leo's shop is 3 miles east." Derek checked his phone, blood running down his arm from a grazing wound he hadn't mentioned. "We can cut through the industrial district. On foot." "With a kid," Carter shook his head. "We're sitting ducks. I can keep up," Sophie insisted, though her breathing came hard and fast. They had no choice. Carter took point, moving as fast as caution allowed, his eyes scanning for threats in every shadow. 40 minutes later, they emerged from the woods behind a strip of warehouses, the city sprawling ahead of them, ugly and beautiful in the morning light. Leo's computer repair sat wedged between a pawn shop and a Thai restaurant, its windows covered with security bars and faded advertisements for services nobody needed anymore. Carter pounded on the back door until a peephole slid open. "Jesus, Carter, you look like you fought a forest. Open up, now." Locks clicked. The door swung inward. Leo Martinez was 40-something, skinny as wire, with glasses held together with electrical tape, and the kind of nervous energy that came from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. His shop smelled like solder and energy drinks and the particular desperation of small businesses barely surviving. "What happened to you guys?" Leo asked, taking in their torn clothes and bleeding scratches. Derek pushed past him. "We got hit. Lock that door. Don't open it for anyone. Who hit you?" "That's what we're here to find out." Carter pulled the USB drive from his vest. "Can you crack this?" Leo took it carefully, turning it over in his hands like it might explode. "Encryption's military grade, and it's password protected. This is going to take time, maybe days if it's serious encryption." Leo moved to his workstation, 3 monitors forming a half circle around a keyboard that looked like it had survived multiple wars. "What's on it?" "Evidence that someone in my club has been running weapons and working with cartels." Carter's voice was flat, emotionless. "And that same someone killed my wife to keep it quiet." Leo's fingers froze over the keyboard. Maria's dead. The pain in Carter's chest flared fresh and hot. 4 days ago. God. Carter, I'm sorry. She was good people. Leo plugged in the drive and code scrolled across his screens in patterns Carter couldn't begin to understand. This is nasty encryption. Whoever locked this knew what they were doing, but there's something else here, a secondary layer like a backup system. What does that mean? It means if I crack the password wrong too many times, the whole thing wipes itself clean. Self-destruct protocol. Leo looked at Carter with serious eyes behind those taped-together glasses. You get 3 tries, maybe 4 if I can bypass the counter. After that, everything deletes permanently. Can you crack it without the password? Given enough time? Yeah, but we're talking weeks, maybe months. Brute force decryption against military-grade security. Derek slumped against the wall, his wounded arm hanging limp. We don't have weeks. Those riders will find us. And whoever sent them knows we have this drive. Then we need the password. Leo turned to Carter. You knew Maria better than anyone. What would she use, something only you would know? Carter had been asking himself that question all night, had tried every answer he could think of, and gotten nothing but failure. He stood by Leo's monitor, staring at the blinking cursor, and for the first time since Maria died, he felt completely, utterly lost. I tried everything. Carter's voice was hollow, empty of the confidence that usually filled it. He listed them off like casualties, anniversary dates. Her mother's maiden name, the location of their first date at that dive bar outside Bozeman, the private nickname he'd called her that nobody else knew. Nothing worked. Every failed attempt felt like losing her again. Sophie stepped forward, her eyes closed, concentrating. When she spoke, her voice carried the cadence of someone reciting something memorized under pressure. Wait, Maria told me something. The night she gave me the drive. She opened her eyes, looking directly at Carter. She said the password is what you call home, but not the place. Carter's mind spun. Not the place. What did he call home that wasn't a location, the compound, Montana? The club itself, none of those felt right. Maria wouldn't have chosen something so obvious. Then it hit him, a memory so clear it hurt. Their first night together 16 years ago, after she'd found him drunk and suicidal in that bar. She'd driven him to a scenic overlook outside town, made him drink water and eat food, and asked him one question. What are you searching for in life? A place to finally stop running. He'd said it without thinking, the truth spilling out the way truth does at 3 a.m. when you've got nothing left to lose. She'd kissed him then, soft and gentle. Then stop running. You're already home. He'd looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. You're my sanctuary. Not this place, not any place, you. Present moment. Leo's shop. Carter's throat closed. Sanctuary. Try sanctuary. Leo typed SANCTUARY. Hit enter. The screen flashed red. Password incorrect. 2 attempts remaining. Wait. Sophie grabbed Carter's arm. She said what you call home. What did you actually call her? The exact words. Carter's memory rewound. He'd said it possessive, made it personal. Try my sanctuary. Capital M, capital S. One word. Leo's fingers moved MYSANCTUARY. The cursor blinked. Then the screen turned green and files exploded across the monitors. Hundreds of documents, spreadsheets, audio files, photographs cascading into view like evidence from beyond the grave. Holy hell, Leo whistled low. This is massive. This is absolutely massive. Carter leaned closer, his heart hammering. The first file was a spreadsheet showing wire transfers, millions of dollars, moving through offshore accounts with names like Seraphim Holdings and Nightfall Capital. Dates going back 2 full years. Payments labeled the Capri as equipment, maintenance, and facility repairs that were 50 times higher than any legitimate expense would justify. Weapons shipments. Derek breathed, opening another file over Leo's shoulder. His face had gone pale. Maria documented everything. Container numbers, dates, destinations. Look at this, crates moving through the port of Seattle, manifests listing agricultural equipment that weigh wrong for tractors. She cross-referenced shipping weights with declared cargo. These are weapons. Leo clicked on an audio file. Maria's voice filled the shop, and Carter felt his chest crack open all over again. I'm telling you, the numbers don't add up. Someone's using club resources to move military-grade weapons. ARs, explosives, even RPGs. And the buyer is Sinaloa Cartel. A second voice responded, male familiar enough that Carter's stomach dropped even before his conscious mind recognized it. Maria, you need to drop this. It's bigger than you think. People will get hurt. People are already getting hurt. These weapons are killing civilians across the border. I have proof. Then you're signing your own death warrant. The recording cut off. Carter's hands shook. He knew that voice. He'd heard it every single day for 40 years. Play it again. Leo replayed it. The voice was undeniable, distinctive, carrying the particular cadence that came from growing up together in the same Tennessee trailer park before Carter's family moved west. Derek stared at the screen, his face ashen as cemetery stones. That can't be. Carter's hand moved to his pistol. That's your voice. The room froze. Derek's face went from ashen to bone white in the space between heartbeats. Carter, that's your voice on a recording where you're telling Maria to back off from investigating weapons shipments. Carter pulled his gun, aiming it at the man he'd trusted for 40 years. The man who'd been best man at his wedding. The man who'd held him when his father died. The man who was supposed to be closer than blood. You think I killed her, Derek's voice cracked. You think I'd hurt Maria. She was like a sister to me. We grew up together. I was at your wedding. I held your hand when your father. Then explain the recording. Explain why you're on tape warning her off. Because she told me what she'd found. Derek's hands came up empty and shaking. She came to me 3 weeks before she died. Said she'd discovered something terrible and didn't know who to trust. I told her to be careful because I was scared for her. I was trying to protect her. Convenient story. Open the next file. Carter said to Leo, his gun never wavering. Leo clicked. A photograph filled the screen. Derek standing in a parking lot at night, talking to a man in an expensive suit. The timestamp read 3 months ago. The lighting was clear enough to identify faces. Who is that? Sophie asked. Leo's voice went quiet. Hector Vega. I've seen his face in the news. He's a lieutenant in the Sinaloa Cartel. High-level operations, handles distribution networks across 3 states. Derek stumbled backward. That's fake. That's photoshopped. Someone's setting me up. There's more. Leo scrolled through files. More photos materialized. Derek at the Seattle docks, Derek meeting with unknown men outside warehouses, Derek handling briefcases that presumably held cash. All time-stamped, all documented with the kind of thoroughness that spoke to months of surveillance. Financial records. Leo opened another file. Payments to offshore accounts. Look at the account names. D. Morrison Holdings. Derek Morrison, your middle name. Derek's face crumbled. I don't have offshore accounts. I've never opened emails coordinating shipments. Leo kept clicking. All from your email address. Detailed logistics, delivery schedules, payment confirmations. It's all here, Derek. Financial records showing payments to offshore accounts in your name. Emails coordinating shipments. Photos of you meeting with cartel. You're the connection. You're the one running weapons through club operations. No, Derek's shout was anguish, desperate. I'm being framed. Someone's using my identity, my accounts, my email. This is all fabricated. Your voice on that recording. Your face in photos. Your accounts with millions of dollars. Carter's finger moved to the trigger. The evidence is right there. Carter, please. Derek's eyes filled with tears. We grew up together in that shithole trailer park in Memphis. I was best man at your wedding. I held your hand when your father died from lung cancer and you couldn't stop crying. You know me. You know I could never. I knew Maria too. Carter's voice could have cut steel. And now she's dead because someone betrayed her. All the evidence points to you. Then the evidence is planted. Derek's voice rose to desperation. Think about it. Why would Maria trust me with what she found if I was the one running the operation? Why would I help you investigate if I was guilty? I've been right beside you this whole time, trying to find who killed her. To control the investigation, Sophie said quietly. Derek looked at her with something between hatred and disbelief. You show up out of nowhere with a convenient story, and now you're tearing us apart. A 10-year-old nobody with an agenda. She showed up with Maria's locket and the USB drive. Carter interrupted. Evidence you clearly didn't know existed, or you would have found it before we did. You would have destroyed it like you're about to destroy yourself. I didn't know because I'm not involved. Derek backed toward the door. Carter, I'm begging you, don't do this. Let me help you find who really killed Maria. Let me prove I'm innocent. Give me a chance to. You can prove it from the lockup back at the compound. Carter stepped forward. You're coming back with us. We'll sort through every piece of evidence. And if you're innocent, we'll find out. And if whoever really did this is still at the compound, Derek's hand moved behind his back. If they get to me before I can prove anything, if they kill me in that lockup and make it look like suicide, don't, Carter's voice went arctic. Don't reach for whatever you're reaching for. Time stretched like taffy pulled too thin. Derek's hand whipped forward, holding a gun, not aimed at Carter, but at the computer. He fired 3 times. The monitors exploded in showers of sparks and glass. Leo screamed and dove for cover, his body hitting the floor hard. I'm sorry, Derek shouted over the ringing echoes, but I'm not going down for something I didn't do. He kicked over Leo's desk, creating a barrier between them, and fired twice more at the USB drive still plugged into the ruined computer. The drive shattered into pieces, plastic and circuitry scattering across the floor, like the fragments of truth they'd briefly held. No. Sophie screamed and dove toward the shattered drive, but it was too late. The evidence was destroyed. Derek bolted for the back door. Carter fired, but Derek was already moving the bullet, punching through the doorframe. By the time Carter reached the door, Derek was on a motorcycle, not his own bike, but something he must have staged earlier, planted for exactly this scenario. The engine roared and Derek disappeared around a corner. Carter ran outside and fired twice more, but Derek was gone, vanished into the city's concrete maze. Back inside, Leo was pulling himself up, bleeding from cuts where glass had hit his face and arms. Sophie knelt beside the shattered USB drive, tears streaming down her face, her hands trying uselessly to gather the broken pieces. The drive, the computer, everything's destroyed. Everything. Leo's voice shook. Carter felt his world crumbling. He'd had it. For maybe 3 minutes, they'd had access to everything Maria had died to protect, and now it was gone, destroyed by the man he trusted most in the world. You had it open. What did you see? Maybe 3 minutes worth. Got through maybe 5% of the files before Leo gestured at the smoking wreckage. I'm sorry, Carter. It's all gone. Sophie clutched the shattered pieces, her voice breaking. Maria died for this. She died gathering this evidence, and now it's gone. It's all gone. Carter's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He opened it and felt ice spread through his veins. Your lieutenant just called me in panic. Told me you're trying to frame him for Maria's death. I'm giving you one chance to back off. The girl disappears. The investigation stops. Or everyone you love dies screaming. You have 24 hours. A second text arrived, an aerial photo of the Iron Skull's compound taken from drone or helicopter. Red circles marked windows, vulnerable angles, perfect sniper positions. Every weak point in their defenses identified and documented. A third text I'm already watching. Carter showed the phone to Sophie and Leo. Sophie's face went hard with an expression far too old for her years. They're going to kill everyone. Not if I kill them first. Carter's voice was cold as permafrost. He had 24 hours to save his club. His only lead had just vanished into Billings. His best friend was either a traitor or the perfect scapegoat, and someone powerful enough to frame Derek, orchestrate Maria's murder, and coordinate a military-style ambush was still out there watching, waiting, planning their next move. They made it back to the compound by noon using back roads and staying off main highways. Carter had called ahead, and the Iron Skulls were on full alert, and armed men watching every approach, weapons visible. The compound transformed into a fortress. The attack at the mill had left 2 men injured, but alive. Danny's broken arm and concussion would heal. The other had taken a grazing wound to the ribs that looked worse than it was, but the mood was poisonous. Derek ran. Vic's voice was incredulous as Carter stood before the assembled club in the meeting room. 21 bikers now, Tommy in the basement lockup. Derek gone, Danny in the medical room. Your lieutenant, your best friend since childhood. He just destroyed evidence and fled. Carter's voice was flat, emotionless, reporting facts the way he'd learned in Marine Corps after-action briefings. The recordings, the files, the photos, all of it showed him working with Sinaloa, running weapons through our operations. When we confronted him, he shot up the computer and took off. The room erupted into chaos. Bikers shouted over each other, some refusing to believe it, others claiming they'd suspected Derek all along. Chairs scraped against concrete. Fists pounded on the table. "This is insane," someone yelled. "Derek's been loyal for 20 years. He founded this charter with Carter's father. Loyalty doesn't mean shit when millions of dollars are involved." Another voice countered. Quiet. Carter's roar silenced them. He looked around at the faces men he'd known for years, men he'd trusted, men who were now eyeing each other with suspicion because if Derek could betray them, anyone could. "I don't care what you believe. Here's what we know: Maria's dead. Tommy confessed to forcing her off the road on someone else's orders. Evidence pointed to Derek. He destroyed that evidence and ran. Now someone's threatening to kill everyone in this compound if we don't back off." He held up his phone showing the aerial photo with sniper positions marked. "We have 24 hours before they make good on that threat. So here's what's happening. We lock down completely. No one enters or leaves. We arm every window and door, and we prepare for war." War with who? Vic demanded. Derek, the cartel, both, everyone who had a hand in killing Maria. Carter's voice was cold steel. "I don't care if it's one man or 100, we end this." After the meeting dissolved into tense preparations, Carter retreated to his office. Sophie followed silently, closing the door behind them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The compound outside buzzed with activity, weapons being distributed, defensive positions, reinforced men preparing for violence. "Do you believe Derek did it?" Sophie finally asked. Carter stood at the window watching his men work. Vic was directing the defensive positions, his organizational skills on full display. Other bikers hauled weapons and ammunition from the armory, everyone moving with purpose. "The evidence says yes." "That's not what I asked." Carter turned to look at her. "This kid saw too much, understood too much. What do you want me to say? That my gut tells me something's wrong? That 40 years of brotherhood can't vanish because of some files on a computer?" He shook his head. "My gut also told me to trust the people who killed Maria. So maybe my gut's broken." "Maria didn't think it was Derek," Sophie said quietly. Carter froze. "What?" "She never said his name. Not once in all our conversations." Sophie moved closer. "She said someone high up was dirty, someone in leadership. But when she talked about Derek, it was always Carter's brother or the lieutenant. She talked about him like he was separate from the investigation." Carter's mind raced. Maria had come to Derek 3 weeks before her death, told him about the investigation. If she suspected him, that would have been suicide. Then why was his voice on that recording? His face in those photos, I don't know. Sophie's voice was small but steady, but Maria was smart, really smart. If she suspected Derek, wouldn't she have been more careful around him? Wouldn't she have told someone else? The logic was sound. Too sound. Carter felt something shift in his understanding. "She told you to trust me. Only me." Sophie pulled another folded piece of paper from her jacket, worn soft from handling. "She gave me this too. Said I should only give it to you if things got really bad. If people you trusted started turning against each other." Carter took the paper with shaking hands. Maria's handwriting covered it, the familiar loops and curves he'd seen on grocery lists and love notes and the birthday card she'd given him 3 months ago that now felt like a lifetime past. "Carter, if you're reading this, I'm gone and things have gone sideways. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm sorry for the pain you're feeling and the impossible choices ahead. By now you've seen evidence that points to Derek, photos, recordings, financial records. It all looks damning. That's because it's meant to. Derek isn't the traitor, he's the scapegoat. The real person behind this is someone smarter, more careful. Someone who knew I was investigating and planted evidence to frame Derek because they knew you'd believe it. They knew it would tear the club apart from inside. You against your best friend. Brother against brother. I don't have proof yet of who it really is. That's why I couldn't accuse anyone directly. But I know Derek isn't capable of this. I've watched him with you with the club. He's loyal to his core. Maybe too loyal, which makes him the perfect target. Trust your instincts, Carter, not the evidence. The evidence can be faked. But you've known Derek your whole life. You know his heart. The real traitor is still there, still watching, still waiting for you to destroy Derek so they can take control completely. Find them. Make them pay. I love you always. Maria. Carter read it twice, 3 times. Each word cut deeper than the last. Maria's words from beyond the grave telling him he'd made a mistake, that he'd driven away his best friend and strongest ally, that the real killer was still at the compound, watching them scramble, watching them tear each other apart. She knew. His voice was barely a whisper. She knew they'd frame him. So Derek is innocent, maybe. Probably. Carter's voice went hollow. Which means I just drove away my best friend, and the real traitor is still here in this compound, watching us scramble. Who's Sophie moved to stand beside him at the window? Who in the club is smart enough to do all this? Carter watched his men below. Vic was still directing defensive positions, moving between groups with the kind of organizational efficiency that came from years managing the club's finances. Always precise, always 3 steps ahead, always in control. Someone with access to everything. Someone who could plant evidence, fake records, manipulate accounts. Someone we'd never suspect, because suspecting them would mean suspecting the foundation itself. He focused on Vic. How long had the treasurer been on his phone today? 4 calls in the last hour that Carter had noticed. Who was he talking to? How long have you been watching him? Sophie asked, following his gaze. Carter felt pieces clicking into place, a puzzle he should have solved days ago. Not long enough. He grabbed his pistol. Stay here, lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. Who is it? Carter looked at the man on the phone. Walter Brennan, Vic. The man who'd been treasurer for 5 years, who handled all the club's finances, who had access to every account and every transaction. The man who'd been loudest about not trusting Sophie. The man who'd pushed hardest to see the USB evidence. The man who tried to turn the club against the investigation from the very beginning. I've been hunting the wrong man. Vengeance filled his eyes. Carter didn't confront Vic immediately. That would be repeating Derek's mistake, acting on emotion before having solid proof. Instead, he watched. For 2 hours, he observed from his office window as Vic moved through the compound. The treasurer talked to small groups, his body language casual but deliberate. He was building something, consensus allegiance, a foundation for whatever move he planned to make next. He's been doing this the whole time, Carter muttered to Sophie, steering us. First toward believing the warlords killed Maria, then toward Tommy, then toward Derek. Always pointing us somewhere else. What do? We need proof. Maria's letter says the evidence against Derek was planted. That means Vic had access to create fake financial records, fake photos, fake everything. Carter grabbed his phone. And if he planted evidence against Derek, there might be traces. Digital fingerprints. He called Leo. The tech answered on the first ring, his voice tense. Please tell me you backed up those files before Derek destroyed the computer. Cloud backup. Leo's words came fast. Everything that loaded in those 3 minutes is saved on my secure server. I was going to tell you, but everything happened so fast, and send me everything you have on the financial records. Specifically, anything showing who created or modified the files. 20 minutes later, Carter's phone buzzed. Leo had sent a compressed folder of recovered files. Carter opened them on Maria's laptop, his hands moving quickly through spreadsheets and documents, searching for metadata, the invisible information that showed who'd touched what and when. There, his finger stabbed at the screen. Hidden in the file properties was a username, V. Brennan, Vic's login credentials. The fake financial records showing Derek's offshore accounts had been created on Vic's computer, using Vic's credentials 3 weeks after Maria died. He made them after she was already dead. Carter breathed. Killed her, then created evidence to frame Derek in case anyone kept investigating. Insurance policy to point us at the wrong target. Sophie leaned closer to the screen. But why Derek? Why not frame someone else? Because Derek was my best friend, my right hand. Carter's jaw clenched. Destroying that relationship would destroy me emotionally and leave the club leaderless. And with me broken and Derek gone, who's next in line to take control? He looked at Sophie. She understood immediately. The treasurer. Vic's been treasurer for 5 years. He'd have everything, the club, the weapons operation, all of it. A knock at the door made them both jump. Kyle, one of the younger bikers, stuck his head in. Carter, Vic's calling another meeting. Says it's urgent. I'll be right there. After Kyle left, Carter turned to Sophie. This is it. He's making his move. Stay here. Stay quiet. If things go bad, there's an exit through the storage room that leads to the woods. You run and don't look back. I'm not leaving you. Maria trusted you with the truth. Carter knelt to her eye level. If I don't make it out of this, someone has to remember what really happened. Someone has to tell the story. Sophie wanted to argue, but she saw the finality in his eyes. She nodded once, tears threatening. Carter checked his pistol and headed for the meeting room. The meeting room was packed, every Iron Skull present armed tense. The 24-hour deadline weighed on everyone like atmospheric pressure before a tornado. Vic stood at the head of the table where Carter usually stood, his face grave, his posture commanding. Brothers, we've got serious problems. Vic's voice carried authority. Our defenses are ready, but we're blind on intel. We don't know where Derek went. We don't know when the cartel's coming. We're sitting ducks waiting to be shot. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Carter stood in the back watching, waiting. I've been making calls to our allies, Iron Kings and Nevada Road Devils in Oregon, Black Thorns in Arizona. They're willing to send reinforcements if we need them. How many? Someone asked. 40 bikes, maybe 50. Enough to turn the tide if the cartel comes at us in force. Vic paused, letting that sink in. But we need to act fast, need to move our operation before the cartel finds us here. Relocate to somewhere defensible. Move where a secondary location, somewhere we can fortify properly. Vic's eyes scanned the room. I've got a warehouse outside Billings, industrial district. Reinforced walls, limited access points, perfect for defense. Your warehouse. Carter's voice cut through from the back. Every head turned. Your location, your allies. Convenient. Vic's expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. What are you implying? I'm implying you've been playing us from the start. Carter stepped forward, pulling out his phone and displaying the metadata on the screen. These financial records you showed us, the ones proving Derek was dirty, you created them 3 weeks after Maria died, using your computer, your login, your credentials. The room went dead silent. Vic's face remained calm, but something flickered behind his eyes. That's absurd. Anyone could have used my computer. My credentials could have been stolen. Maria knew. Carter pulled out the letter, holding it up where everyone could see. She figured out you were running weapons through the club. She documented everything. And when she got too close, you had her killed. You framed Derek to cover your tracks. You've been manipulating this investigation from the beginning. This is insane. Vic's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his composure. I've been trying to help. I've been trying to keep this club together while you've been falling apart with grief. But Carter had already seen the truth. He saw it in the way Vic's hand moved slowly toward his vest, in the way his eyes flicked toward the exits, calculating odds and escape routes. Maria was going to expose you. So you had Tommy kill her, then you planted evidence to destroy Derek. You knew it would break me. Leave the club leaderless. And then you could step in, take control of everything you'd built using our resources. Vic's smile was cold and empty. You're smarter than I thought. Maria was too. That's why she had to die. The room exploded. Bikers surged forward, shouting, reaching for weapons. But Vic moved faster than anyone expected. He grabbed Kyle, the young biker who'd been standing too close, and pressed a gun to his head. Everyone back. Vic dragged Kyle toward the door. I walk out of here or Kyle dies. Your choice. The bikers froze, weapons, half-drawn faces twisted with rage and helplessness. Kyle's face was white with terror. You walk out, you're dead within the hour. I've got insurance. Vic's smile widened. I know where Derek is hiding. Got men on him right now. You shoot me, I don't call them off, and Derek dies too. Your best friend, the brother you just realized you betrayed. Where is he? Old Fletcher Warehouse on the South Docks. Pier 7. Vic backed toward the exit using Kyle as a shield. But my men are already there. You'll never reach him in time. Sophie's voice came from the doorway. Then we better hurry. Every head turned. Sophie stood there holding Carter's backup pistol in both hands, aimed steady at Vic despite her small size. Let Kyle go, or Maria's not the only ghost you'll answer to. Vic's laugh was hollow. You think a 10-year-old scares me? No. Sophie's hands didn't shake, but 30 Iron Skulls behind her should. The bikers had formed a wall behind Sophie, weapons drawn, faces carved from stone. This wasn't about club politics anymore. This was about Maria, about betrayal, about a little girl who'd kept her promise when grown men had failed. Vic's smile crumbled. He shoved Kyle forward hard and bolted through the side door. Several bikers moved to chase, but Carter shouted, "Let him go. If Derek's at the South Docks, we need to move now. Could be a trap." That's it. It's all a trap at this point. Carter grabbed his vest. But Derek is my brother. I threw him to the wolves because I believed fake evidence. I'm not leaving him to die. 5 minutes later, 20 motorcycles roared out of the compound engines, screaming into the afternoon. Carter led on his bike with Sophie in an armored SUV behind him, surrounded by 4 armed bikers. The rest spread out in protective formation, a rolling army of leather and chrome racing toward the docks in whatever trap Vic had prepared. Carter's phone rang through his helmet Bluetooth. Leo's voice came through urgent and frightened. "Carter, I've been digging deeper into Vic's files. You need to hear this. Make it fast. We're rolling hot." Vic wasn't just running weapons, he was running a whole network. 3 warehouses across 2 states, all storing military-grade hardware. ARs, explosives, anti-tank weapons. Enough firepower to start a war. Leo's typing came through frantically in the background. And there's more. He's got a major shipment scheduled for tonight. 20 million in weapons moving to Sinaloa cartel. If that shipment goes through, Vic disappears with the money, and the cartel owns the distribution network he built using your club's name. Where's the shipment? 3 locations. Pier 7 is one, that's where Derek is. But there's also Warehouse 12 in the industrial district and a storage facility on Highway 9. All 3 are loading tonight. Simultaneous operations. Carter's mind raced through tactical options, none of them good. Send the addresses to everyone's phones. He made quick calls, organizing on the fly. 7 bikes would hit Warehouse 12. 6 would take Highway 9. Carter and 6 others would assault Pier 7 to rescue Derek. They were splitting their force across 3 locations, exactly what Vic wanted, but Derek's life was on the line, and 20 million in weapons couldn't be allowed to reach the cartel. The sun was setting when they reached the docks. Carter killed his engine 2 blocks out and approached on foot. The massive shipping containers created steel canyons, shadows pooling between them like spilled ink. Fletcher Warehouse loomed ahead, a massive concrete structure with broken windows and rust bleeding down the walls. Lights spilled from inside. They were 50 feet away when gunfire erupted, not at them, but from inside the warehouse. Automatic weapons rattling in short control bursts. Derek was in there fighting for his life against Vic's hired guns. Carter sprinted forward, and his team followed, weapons up and ready. They burst through the warehouse entrance into chaos. Derek was pinned behind a forklift, bleeding from his shoulder, returning fire at 8 men in tactical gear. Weapons crates were stacked everywhere, marked with cartel symbols, testament to Vic's operation. A semi-truck idled near the loading dock, its trailer half filled with the $20 million shipment. The tactical team turned at the new threat. Bullets whined past Carter's head, and he dove behind a crate, came up firing. Beside him, his brothers did the same. The warehouse became a war zone, gunfire echoing off concrete walls, muzzle flashes strobing in the dim light, brass casings raining on concrete like deadly hail. One of Vic's men went down, then another. But they were well-trained and well-armed, using the crates for cover and firing in coordinated bursts that spoke to military experience. One attacker made a break for the truck, and Carter shot him in the leg. He went down screaming. 3 minutes of brutal close-quarters combat later, the warehouse fell silent, except for groaning wounded. 6 of Vic's tactical team were dead, 2 surrendered with hands up, and the Iron Skulls had taken minor wounds, nothing fatal. Carter ran to Derek, who'd slumped against the forklift. "You came back." Derek's voice was weak. Blood soaked his shoulder, but his eyes were alert. "I'm sorry." Carter's voice cracked. "I should have trusted you. Maria tried to tell me." Later, Derek gripped his arm with his good hand. "Vic's not here. He's at one of the other locations, and he's planning to blow them all. Erase the evidence. Kill anyone inside." Carter's blood froze. "Explosives," Derek pointed at the warehouse ceiling with his good arm. "C4 wired to the support columns?" "There and there and there. Remote detonators. He's going to bring this whole place down." Carter's radio screamed with overlapping transmissions. Both other teams reporting explosives at their locations. Both asking for orders. 3 buildings rigged to blow. His brothers spread across all of them. And somewhere Vic held the detonator, watching, waiting, ready to kill them all. All teams evacuate now. Carter's voice cut through the radio static. Buildings are rigged. Get out. He hauled Derek to his feet, ignoring the man's grunt of pain. The semi-truck sat there loaded with millions in weapons evidence desperately needed, but it wasn't worth anyone's life. They stumbled toward the warehouse entrance as Carter's team scattered behind them, running for their lives. They made it 50 yards from the warehouse when Carter's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Vic. Smart boy. Figured out the explosives. Vic's voice was cold, mechanical. But here's your problem, Carter. I'm watching all 3 locations right now. I can blow any of them whenever I want. And I've got another surprise for you. Check on your little friend in the SUV. Ice flooded Carter's veins. He spun around. The SUV sat 2 blocks away where he'd left it. But something was wrong. The guards who'd been protecting it were face down on the ground, not moving. The back door hung open. Sophie was gone. A photo arrived on his phone, Sophie in a chair, zip-tied and gagged, terrified. Vic's hand rested on her shoulder. Behind her, an office setting. Shipping office, Pier 9, 2 blocks east. Vic's voice carried absolute confidence. 10 minutes before I detonate everything. Come alone or the girl dies first, then your brothers, then this whole dock goes up like the 4th of July. The line went dead. Derek grabbed Carter's arm, his face pale from blood loss. It's a trap, I know. Maria died protecting her. I'm not letting that be for nothing. Carter started running toward Pier 9, his 62-year-old body protesting every step, but his will overriding the pain. Behind him, he heard Derek shouting orders to the others, organizing them to clear the warehouses, but stay close. If Carter didn't make it out, the club would need someone to lead. The shipping office sat at the end of Pier 9, a 2-story structure of corrugated metal and grimy windows. Lights showed on the 2nd floor. Carter entered through the ground-level gun drawn, every sense screaming danger. The stairs creaked under his boots, each step announcing his presence. At the top, a door stood half open. Carter kicked it wide, and the truth of his situation became clear. The office was spartanly furnished, desk, filing cabinets, chairs. Sophie sat in the center, still zip-tied, tears streaming down her face. Vic stood behind her, holding a detonator in one hand and a pistol pressed to her head with the other. Drop the gun. Carter set his pistol on the floor and kicked it away. Now the ankle holster back up. Vic pressed the gun harder against Sophie's temple, and she whimpered through the gag. The backup weapon skittered across the floor, leaving Carter completely unarmed. Better. Vic's smile was reptilian. You know what your problem is, Carter. You care too much. Maria cared too much, too. That's why she had to die. She was innocent. She was a liability. Vic's finger rested on the detonator. Found my operation by accident. Noticed some accounting discrepancies. Most people would have ignored it. But not Maria. She had to dig. Had to play detective. Had to ruin everything I'd built over 5 years. You built it with club resources. Our money. Our reputation. Our brothers risking their lives while you got rich selling weapons to cartels. Our brothers are idiots playing dress-up on motorcycles. Vic's contempt was naked. I turned this club into a real business. An empire. Would have shared it with you if you'd been smart enough to join me. You killed my wife. I gave an order. Tommy pulled the trigger, so to speak. Vic shrugged. Though technically, you killed her. Your rigid sense of honor. Your brotherhood nonsense. She died because she was loyal to you and your outdated ideals. Carter's hands curled into fists, but Vic's finger was still on the detonator. One wrong move and everyone died. Sophie, Derek, all his brothers at 3 locations. What now? You blow the warehouses, kill us all, disappear with the money close. Vic tilted his head. I blow the warehouses. Your brothers die. You and the girl die. Iron Skulls collapse. And I resurface in 6 months in Mexico with a new name and enough money to live like a king. The cartel thinks you stole their shipment. I've already sent them evidence. They'll hunt you for years while I disappear. Sophie's eyes met Carter's. Despite the gate, despite the zip ties, despite the gun to her head, she looked determined. Her gaze flicked down to her right hand. Her pinky finger moved, tapped twice against her leg. A signal. She was trying to tell him something. Her finger pointed toward the filing cabinet to Vic's left. Carter's eyes flicked to that direction for a split second. Something was there. Something she'd seen. Any last words, Vic asked. I'll make sure they're memorable at your funeral. Yeah, Carter smiled coldly. Maria told me you'd monologue. She said you couldn't help yourself. Always had to be the smartest guy in the room. Always had to explain how clever you were. Vic's face darkened. What? She told Sophie something else. A third secret. The one she saved for the end. There's nothing else. The filing cabinet. Top drawer, Carter said clearly. Maria hid her real backup there 2 weeks before she died. Everything you did, everything you said, she recorded it all and hid it where you'd never think to look in your own office. Vic's eyes widened. His head turned slightly toward the cabinet, curiosity overriding caution for one crucial second. Sophie threw herself backwards, slamming her chair into Vic's legs. He stumbled. The gun and detonator both swung away from their targets for one heartbeat. Carter launched himself forward and hit Vic like a freight train, driving them both into the wall. The detonator flew from Vic's hands, skittering across the floor toward the door. The gun went off, a deafening crack in the enclosed space, the bullet punching into the ceiling. They crashed through the office door and tumbled down the stairs in a tangle of limbs and fury. Carter's fist connected with Vic's jaw. Vic's elbow caught Carter's ribs, and pain exploded through his chest. They hit the ground floor, still fighting, rolled across concrete, each trying to gain advantage. Vic was younger by 10 years faster. But Carter was pure rage given form, 40 years of brotherhood, betrayed, channeling through his fists. Vic got on top, his hands closing around Carter's throat. Pressure built behind Carter's eyes. His vision started to tunnel black, creeping in at the edges. This was how it ended, strangled by a traitor in a shipping office while Sophie watched from above. A gunshot cracked. Vic jerked his grip, loosening. He looked down at the red bloom spreading across his side, confusion crossing his face. Derek stood in the doorway, smoking pistol in his good hand, his wounded shoulder still bleeding. That's for Maria. Vic collapsed sideways. Carter shoved him off and gasped for air, his throat on fire. Derek moved closer but kept his gun trained on Vic. The detonator. It's still active upstairs. Carter's hands found Vic's throat, now squeezing. Disarm it, now, or I let you bleed out slowly. Vic's laugh was wet and broken blood bubbling from his lips. Can't, it's on a timer. Set it when you arrived. Buildings blow in 3 minutes, whether I'm alive or not. You're lying, am I? Vic's smile was bloody. Only way to stop it is the override code, 8 digits, and I'm the only one who knows it. Footsteps pounded on the stairs. Sophie appeared, her zip ties cut, somehow the gag pulled down. She held the detonator in both hands, staring at the display. 2 minutes, 50 seconds. Get out of here, Carter ordered. Get back to the compound. There's no time. Sophie knelt beside Vic, and her voice was quiet but certain. Maria figured out your code. She told me what it was in case we needed it. Vic's eyes widened. Impossible. She never. Your daughter's birthday. Sophie's voice was steady. The daughter you haven't seen in 6 years because she won't talk to you anymore. October 15th, 2017, 10:15-2017. Vic's face went ashen. Sophie's fingers moved over the detonator, punching in the numbers 10152017. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened, and Carter thought they were all about to die. Then the display changed. Timer disarmed. Charges safe. The breath Carter had been holding exploded out. Sophie set down the detonator carefully and looked at Vic with something like pity. Maria said you were broken long before you became evil. She felt sorry for you, but sorry doesn't bring her back. Vic tried to speak again, but blood filled his mouth. His body went slack. His eyes stared at nothing. He was gone. Carter pulled out his radio. All teams, charges disarmed. Secure the locations. Document everything before police arrive. Over the next hour, organized chaos reigned. The Iron Skulls photographed the weapons, the financial records in Vic's office, the tactical teams he'd hired, the shipping manifests. Everything that would prove Vic's guilt and the club's unwilling involvement. By the time sirens wailed in the distance, they'd gathered enough evidence to bury Vic's operation forever. Derek received medical attention from a biker who'd been a combat medic in Iraq. Carter stood with Sophie on Pier 7, watching the sun rise over the docks, orange and pink painting the steel containers, turning oil-slicked water into fire. It's over, Sophie said quietly. Carter put a hand on her shoulder. Not yet. There's one more thing we need to do. 3 days later, Maria's funeral finally happened. The same rural chapel outside Billings, the same white roses that had waited in refrigeration while truth fought its way into daylight. But everything felt different now. The air held less weight. The leather vest carried less tension. 23 iron skulls filled the church again, but this time they stood as brothers instead of suspects, united by grief instead of divided by suspicion. Derek stood at Carter's side, his arm in a sling, but his head held high. The doctors had patched his shoulder clean through and through, no permanent damage beyond the scar he'd carry. Tommy sat in county jail awaiting trial, having agreed to testify against the remains of Vic's operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. The hired tactical teams had scattered or been arrested. The weapons shipments had been seized. The FBI was building cases that would take years to fully untangle. But today wasn't about justice. Today was about goodbye. The Iron Skulls weren't alone. Word had spread through the motorcycle community the way wildfire spreads through dry Montana prairie, fast and consuming. The Iron Kings from Nevada had sent a delegation of 15 riders. The Road Devils from Oregon brought 12. The Blackthorns from Arizona arrived with 18 bikes and a flag they'd ridden 2 days straight to deliver. 70-plus bikers packed the small chapel until standing room disappeared and men lined the walls with heads bowed. Maria hadn't just been a biker's wife. She'd been a warrior who'd fought corruption with nothing but courage and a USB drive, who'd protected a homeless child when nobody else cared, who'd documented truth knowing it would cost her everything. Her death had exposed a cancer that would have destroyed the Iron Skulls from within. She'd saved them all, even from the grave. Sophie stood beside the coffin one last time. She'd cleaned up over the past 3 days, showered new clothes that actually fit, hairbrushed until it shone. But her eyes still carried those shadows, the kind that never fully fade. She placed her small hand on the polished wood, and the chapel went silent. I kept my promise. Her whisper carried in the stillness. They know the truth now. You can rest. You can finally rest. She stepped back and Carter moved forward. He'd spent 2 days writing what he wanted to say, filling pages with memories and grief and love. But standing here now, looking at Maria's coffin, the words dissolved. He pulled out the letter instead, Maria's final message written weeks before her death, before she knew how it would end, but knowing enough to prepare. His voice cracked as he read, "To my Iron Skulls family, if you're reading this, I've lost my fight, but I pray you've won yours." He had to stop, breathe, force the words past the broken glass in his throat. Protect the innocent. Stand for truth, even when it costs everything. And please give Sophie the family she never had. She is the bravest of us all. The last sentence broke him completely. Derek stepped forward and took the letter, finishing it, while Carter's shoulders shook with grief he'd been holding back for 7 days. Ride free. Ride proud. Remember why we wear these colors. Maria. The pastor nodded to the pallbearers, Carter, Derek, and 4 others who'd known Maria longest. They lifted the coffin, and its weight was nothing compared to what they had been carrying. They carried her out of the chapel into October sunshine that felt too bright for the moment, loaded her into the hearse for the drive to the cemetery. The burial happened under an old cottonwood tree that had watched Montana change for 100 years. Late October leaves drifted down, gold and red and orange, falling like blessings on the assembled crowd. The coffin was lowered into Montana earth, into the soil Maria had loved, the place she'd chosen to make home. Each biker tossed a handful of dirt, the old ritual, the final goodbye. The sound of earth on wood was the loneliest sound Carter had ever heard. After the cemetery, they gathered in the parking lot. 70 motorcycles lined up in formation, chrome catching the afternoon sun. Carter lifted Sophie onto his bike and settled her in front of him where she could see the road ahead. Her small body fit in the space between his arms and the handlebars, protected and safe. You're one of us now, for as long as you want to be. His voice was rough from crying and not sleeping in 7 days of grief. Sophie looked around at the circle of bikers, hard men with soft hearts, warriors who'd become her family men, who'd kept Maria's last wish when keeping it meant risking everything. Forever. She said it with the certainty that only comes when you've lost everything else and finally found something worth holding. Carter reached down and showed her the gas tank. Someone had painted it while he was at the docks, professional work. Clean lines, colors that matched his bike's scheme. Sophie's name sat there beside Maria's 2 women who'd saved his life in different ways. One by loving him when he was broken, one by trusting him when trust should have been impossible. 70 engines roared to life with a sound like thunder rolling across the Montana plain. They pulled out of the cemetery in formation, a memorial run for a fallen sister, a ride to honor someone who died protecting what they'd built. The rumble echoed off the hills and trees, announcing their presence to anyone who cared to listen. They rode through Billings with deliberate slowness, letting the city see them. People stopped on sidewalks. Some saluted veterans, recognizing the funeral formation. Others bowed their heads in respect they might not understand but felt anyway. Children waved and their parents pulled them close, not out of fear, but out of reverence for something larger than themselves. An old man in a Korean war cap stood at attention outside a coffee shop, his hand raised in salute that trembled with age and respect. Carter nodded to him as they passed one warrior, acknowledging another, one generation passing the torch to the next, even though Carter was old enough to be the grandfather himself. The Iron Skulls rode united now. Their enemies destroyed their honor, restored their family whole again, minus one angel who watched from wherever angels watch from. Vic's betrayal had been cut out like cancer, painful and necessary. Derek had been vindicated. Tommy would serve his time and maybe possibly find some kind of redemption on the other side. The club had survived what should have destroyed it. Sophie held tight to Carter as wind whipped through her hair. For the first time in years, maybe in her whole short life, she felt safe, felt protected, felt like she belonged somewhere. The motorcycle's rumble transmitted through her whole body, steady and powerful and sure. Behind her, Carter's presence was solid as stone, reliable as sunrise, exactly what Maria had promised he would be. They rode out of the city toward the compound, the procession stretching behind them like a steel snake winding through Montana landscape. Mountains rose in the distance, snow already dusting the peaks, even though winter hadn't officially arrived. The sky stretched vast and blue overhead, the kind of sky that made you believe in something bigger than yourself. Carter felt Maria's presence in the ride, in the rumble of engines and the warmth of brotherhood in Sophie's grip on his waist. Not a ghost, nothing supernatural, just memory and love, woven so tight into the fabric of living that they became indistinguishable from breath itself. She was in every mile of highway they'd ridden together, every sunset they'd watched from the compound, every moment of peace she'd given him when peace seemed impossible. The compound appeared ahead, and the formation slowed. The visiting clubs would stay for a memorial feast, food and drink, and stories about Maria, celebration of life instead of dwelling on death. It was the biker way, the way warriors had honored their fallen since humans first learned to fight and die for things larger than themselves. But first, Carter needed a moment alone. He peeled off from the group with a gesture to Derek, who nodded understanding. Carter rode past the compound entrance, following a dirt trail that wound up into the hills. Sophie didn't ask questions, just held on as the bike climbed higher, engine growling against the grade. A mile from the compound, Carter stopped at an overlook he and Maria had discovered years ago. The view stretched for miles, the compound below Billings, in the distance mountains beyond that, the whole world laid out like a promise of possibility. They'd come here on anniversaries and bad days and good days and days when they just needed to remember why Montana was worth the brutal winters and the isolation and the struggle. Carter killed the engine. Silence rushed in, not complete silence, but the natural kind filled with wind and birdsong and the whisper of grass moving. Sophie climbed off the bike and stood beside him, looking at the view. She loved this place. Carter's voice was quiet. Said it reminded her that problems were small and the world was big, and love was the only thing that made any of it worth anything. Sophie slipped her hand into his. She was right. Yeah, she usually was. Carter squeezed her hand gently, aware of how small she was, how much courage lived in that small frame. This kid had walked into a chapel full of dangerous men and refused to let them bury truth, had kept promises when adults had broken theirs, had survived horrors he could only imagine, and come out the other side still capable of trust. Maria would have been proud of you. He looked down at her. Hell, I'm proud of you. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. She said you were the best man she'd ever known. Said if anything happened to her, I should trust you completely. She was right about that too. Carter felt something break loose in his chest, the last piece of grief that had been holding him together through 7 days of investigation and violence and revelation. He knelt down to Sophie's level and pulled her into a hug, this broken child and this broken man holding each other up while the Montana wind blew around them. I'm going to take care of you. Legal adoption, the whole thing. You're going to have a home and school and everything you should have had all along. Sophie's arms wrapped around his neck, tight enough to hurt. I don't need everything. I just need this. I just need family. You've got it. You've got all of us. They stayed like that for a long moment, two survivors clinging to each other while the world turned beneath them. Then Carter stood and looked out at the view one more time. Goodbye, wildflower. He said it to the wind, in the mountains, in the empty sky. I'll find you again someday. But until then, I've got promises to keep. Sophie tugged his hand. We should go back. Derek will worry. Yeah, let's go home. They climbed back on the bike and Carter started the engine. The ride down the hill was easier than the ride up, gravity helping instead of fighting the path, familiar instead of uncertain. By the time they reached the compound, the memorial feast had begun. Long tables had been set up in the main hall, covered with food that people had brought, casseroles and barbecue and pizzas, and the kind of comfort food that communities create when words fail. 70 bikers filled the space with noise and warmth and life. Stories about Maria circulated, some funny, some touching, all true. The Iron King's road captain told how Maria had helped his wife through cancer treatment, driving 3 hours each way, twice a week, to sit with her during chemo. One of the road devils remembered Maria organizing a toy drive that had filled 2 semi-trucks for kids in foster care. The Blackthorn's president shared how Maria had talked his teenage daughter out of suicide, sitting with her through a dark night until dawn brought hope. She saved people. He said simply, that's what she did. She saw broken things and she fixed them. Fixed me. Fixed my daughter. Fixed this club by making sure the truth came out even after she was gone. Carter listened to the stories and realized he'd only known part of Maria. She'd been his wife, his salvation, his sanctuary. But she'd been so much more to so many others, a light in dark places, a voice for those who had none, a warrior who fought with kindness instead of violence, but never backed down from necessary battles. Sophie sat beside him, eating her first real meal in days, listening to strangers talk about the woman who'd saved her life. Each story added depth and dimension to her memories. Maria wasn't just the kind lady who brought food to the bridge. She was a force, a presence, someone who'd spent her whole life making the world incrementally better, one broken person at a time. As the evening wore on and the sun set beyond the compound walls, Derek raised a glass. The hall quieted. To Maria, who saw the best in all of us, even when we couldn't see it in ourselves. Who fought for truth when lying would have been safer. Who saved this a club by refusing to let corruption win. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. And to Sophie, who kept her promise when breaking it would have been easier. Who stood in front of this club and demanded we see the truth. Who's got more courage at 10 years old than most men find in a lifetime. To Maria and Sophie. 70 voices echoed, glasses raised. The toast rang through the hall like a benediction. The visiting clubs left the next morning, their bikes rumbling out in formation, with promises to return for happier occasions. The compound settled into new rhythms, life, without Vic's manipulation, without Derek's false guilt, without the cancer that had been growing for 2 years. Carter threw himself into the adoption paperwork with the same intensity he'd brought to the investigation. Sophie needed stability, needed legal protection, needed to know she wouldn't wake up one day and find herself back in the system. The club attorney, a woman named Patricia, who'd handled their legal issues for 15 years, walked him through the process. As club president with stable income and housing, Carter's application would be strong. Sophie's foster care history and the circumstances of her homelessness would complicate things, but also demonstrate clear need. The fact that she had no living relatives simplified certain aspects, even as it broke his heart. It'll take 3 to 6 months, Patricia explained in her office, downtown, papers spread across her desk. Home visits, background checks, court hearings. But barring something unexpected, the judge will approve it, especially given everything that happened. The news coverage had been extensive, local stations, first then regional, finally national when the FBI involvement became public. Grieving biker president, murdered wife, child, witness corruption, and cartel connections. It had everything news cycles craved. Most of the coverage portrayed the Iron Skulls sympathetically, which was unusual. Carter had given one interview, brief and controlled, explaining that Maria had died exposing corruption and protecting an innocent child. Sophie appeared in none of the footage. Patricia and the FBI both agreed she needed protection from publicity. Her identity was sealed in court documents. To the public, she was just a minor witness who cannot be identified. But within the motorcycle community, her name was legend. The kid who wouldn't let them bury Maria until truth came out. The kid who kept her promise. The kid who'd been braver than grown men with guns and decades of experience. Weeks passed. October became November, and Montana winter arrived with characteristic brutality: snow in the mountains, frost in the valleys, wind that cut through leather like it was nothing. Sophie enrolled in school for the first time in almost a year. Carter drove her every morning, watching her walk into the building with a backpack and lunch and all the normal things children should have. She struggled at first. Math, she'd missed reading, she'd fallen behind on social skills, atrophied from months alone. But she was smart and determined. Teachers reported she worked harder than anyone, staying after class for extra help completing assignments with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. Other kids didn't know what to make of her at first, this quiet girl who'd appeared mid-semester with a story nobody could talk about. But gradually friendships formed. A girl named Emma who liked the same books. A boy named Marcus who shared his lunch when Sophie forgot hers. Carter attended parent-teacher conferences and school concerts and all the mundane rituals he'd never experienced. He and Maria had never had children, her choice initially, his acceptance later, both of them content with each other and the club of family they'd built. But Sophie filled spaces he hadn't known were empty, gave him purpose beyond the club, made him think about legacy and the future instead of dwelling in past and present. Derek helped at stepping into the role of uncle with natural ease. He took Sophie to movies while Carter handled club business. Taught her to throw a punch properly when she asked, showed her how motorcycles worked when she expressed curiosity. The bond between them was immediate and strong. Two people who'd both been falsely accused, both knew what it meant to be judged unfairly, both understood the weight of kept promises. December arrived. The adoption hearing was scheduled for mid-January, assuming all the background checks cleared. Sophie would turn 11 in February, a birthday she'd never properly celebrated, she admitted one night. Her mother had been too high to remember, her foster father hadn't cared, and on the streets, birthdays were just another day trying to survive. "We'll do it right this time," Carter promised. "Big party, all your school friends, whatever you want. Even a cake, especially a cake. Biggest cake the bakery can make." Sophie smiled, and Carter saw glimpses of the childhood she should have had, the innocence that survival had stolen. They were getting some of it back, piece by piece. It wouldn't erase the trauma. Patricia had arranged therapy sessions twice a week, and Sophie was working through things with a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma. But healing was possible. Maria had believed that, had staked her whole life on the belief that broken people could be made whole if someone cared enough to help. Christmas came. The Iron Skulls threw a party at the compound, not the wild ragers of earlier years, but something family-friendly, conscious of Sophie's presence. Presents piled under a massive tree someone had cut from the national forest. Food and warmth and laughter filled the halls. Sophie received gifts from bikers she barely knew. Books and clothes and art supplies and a laptop for school. But the gift she treasured most was the one Carter gave her, a small locket identical to the one Maria had given her, but new undamaged. Open it. Inside was a photo, Maria on one side, Sophie on the other, the two women who changed his life. "So you never forget her. So you always remember you were loved." Sophie's tears came fast and she threw her arms around him. "I could never forget. Never." The adoption hearing happened on January 15th. Carter wore his best clothes, button-down shirt, clean jeans. The leather vest left at home for once. Sophie wore a dress Patricia had helped her pick out, navy blue and simple. They sat in family court while the judge reviewed the case file, asked questions, verified details. The foster care system had no objections. Sophie had been a runaway with a history of abuse. Returning her to that situation would be cruel. No relatives had come forward. No other parties claimed interest. Carter's background check was clean, except for minor infractions decades old. The home visit had gone well. Sophie's therapist provided a letter supporting the adoption. Her teachers submitted statements about her progress and adjustment. The judge was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. "Mr. Reeves, do you understand that adoption is permanent? That you're taking full legal responsibility for Sophie's welfare until she reaches adulthood? I do, Your Honor." And Sophie, do you want to be adopted by Mr. Reeves? You can be honest, this is your choice. Sophie looked up at the judge with those eyes that had seen too much. He's the only family I have, the only family I want. The judge nodded, made notes, reviewed papers one final time. Then she smiled. Based on the evidence and testimony, I'm granting the petition. Sophie is now legally your daughter. Congratulations to you both. The gavel came down, and just like that, Sophie had a father and Carter had a daughter. They walked out of the courthouse into January cold, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Carter's hand held Sophie's, and the grip was different now. Not just protective, but permanent, not just temporary shelter, but forever home. Derek waited outside with 10 other Iron Skulls, their bikes lined up despite the cold. When Carter and Sophie emerged, engines roared to life, a celebration, an announcement, a declaration that family had grown by one. The ride back to the compound was triumphant. Cars pulled over to let them pass the formation, commanding respect, even from strangers who knew nothing of their story. At the compound, more bikers waited with a banner, "Welcome home, Sophie." The feast that followed rivaled Christmas food and drink and joy that had been in short supply for too long. That night, after the celebration wound down and people drifted home, Carter found Sophie in what had become her room. She decorated it slowly over the month's posters and books and the accumulation of normal childhood. But the locket sat on her nightstand, the one containing Maria's photo, the most precious thing she owned. "You okay?" Carter asked from the doorway. Sophie looked up from the homework she'd been finishing. "Better than okay. I'm home." "Yeah, you are." He came in and sat on the edge of her bed. "Your mom, Maria, she'd be so proud of you. Proud of how brave you've been. Proud of how hard you're working in school. Proud that you kept your promise, even when it was terrifying. Do you think she can see us?" Wherever she is, Carter considered the question seriously. He'd never been particularly religious. Combat had beaten most faith out of him, and decades of hard living hadn't brought it back. But looking at Sophie, seeing how much good could come from tragedy, he wanted to believe in something. "I think if love is real, and I know it is because I felt it with her, then maybe some part of that love continues. Maybe she's here in the ways we remember her, in the ways we tried to live up to what she believed about us. I'll make her proud." Sophie said it like a vow. "I promise." "You already have, sweetheart. You already have." February brought Sophie's birthday and the promise party. 20 kids from school crowded into the compound's main hall, parents dropping them off with varying degrees of comfort about leaving their children at a motorcycle club. But Patricia had helped design the invitation to emphasize supervised, appropriate celebration, and Carter's demeanor put most concerns to rest. The cake was exactly as promised, massive 3 layers decorated with books and motorcycles and all the things Sophie loved. She blew out 11 candles while 20 kids sang off-key and 20 bikers sang even worse. Presents piled up, more books, more art supplies, a gift card to her favorite store. But the smile on her face was worth more than anything money could buy. Emma and Marcus became regular fixtures at the compound over the following months. At first, their parents were hesitant, but they saw how Sophie thrived, how Carter watched over all the kids with protective intensity, how the dangerous-looking bikers were gentle with children and respectful to parents. The compound became a second home for Sophie's school friends, and the Iron Skulls became accustomed to children running through spaces that usually echoed with adult concerns. Derek taught the kids basic motorcycle maintenance, how to check oil change a tire, understand the machine. Carter supervised homework sessions at the big table where club business used to be the only concern. Other bikers volunteered their skills. One taught basic carpentry, another coached an informal basketball team in the compound yard, a third led weekend camping trips into the mountains. The club was changing, evolving into something Maria would have approved of. Still strong, still capable of protecting their own, but softer at the edges, more connected to community, more conscious of the example they set. Vic's betrayal had been a wake-up call. Insular thinking and suspicion of outsiders had nearly destroyed them. Opening up, letting people see who they really were, building bridges instead of walls, felt vulnerable but necessary. Spring arrived, the snow melted, and green returned to Montana. On the anniversary of Maria's death, April 12th, 1 year later, Carter and Sophie rode out to the cemetery together. The Iron Skulls had installed a proper headstone over winter Maria Reeves' beloved wife and sister, who fought for truth and protected the innocent. They stood there in silence for a long while. Sophie placed fresh flowers, wildflowers she'd picked from the hills, the kind Maria had loved. Carter just stood with his hand on the cold stone, saying goodbye and hello and thank you all at once. You did good, he said finally. Everything you planned, everything you set in motion, it worked. You saved the club, saved Sophie, saved me from becoming someone I'd hate. Sophie added her own words. I'm doing good in school. I have friends. I have a dad who loves me. I'm safe and happy, and I kept my promise. You can rest now. You can really rest. The wind blew through the cottonwood tree, rustling leaves that had witnessed another season's change. Birds sang. The sun warmed the earth. Life continued, because that's what life does. Continues despite tragedy, finds ways to grow through grief, transforms loss into something that honors the dead by living well. They rode back to the compound where Derek was organizing the spring cleanup painting buildings, repairing winter damage, preparing for the riding season ahead. Sophie changed out of her nice clothes and joined the other kids helping with simple tasks. Carter watched her laugh with Emma while they painted a fence, watched her confidence, and Joy watched her simply being 11 years old without the weight of trauma crushing every moment. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in colors that defied description, Carter stood on the compound's observation deck. The same place he'd stood 7 months ago, drowning in grief and rage, wondering if he'd survive losing Maria. The same place where he'd held Sophie while they both cried and promised to honor Maria's memory. He was still here, still standing, still leading the club and raising a daughter and finding reasons to wake up each morning. The grief hadn't disappeared. He suspected it never would, that he'd carry Maria's absence until his own death. But it had transformed into something livable, something that coexisted with happiness instead of consuming it entirely. Derek joined him on the deck, 2 beers in hand. He passed one to Carter, and they stood in comfortable silence watching darkness creep across the Montana landscape. She's doing good. Really good, Derek said finally. Yeah, better than good. She's thriving. Because of you. Because you kept your promise to Maria. We kept our promises, Carter corrected. You stood by me when you could have run. Took a bullet helping clear my name. Taught Sophie things I don't know how to teach. This isn't on me alone. This is brotherhood. This is what the club's supposed to be upon. Derek smiled, and in that smile, Carter saw 40 years of friendship, of trust, rebuilt after being nearly destroyed, a bond strong enough to survive even the worst betrayals. To brotherhood. Derek raised his beer. And to the women who make us better than we'd be without them. They drank as stars emerged overhead, as the compound settled into evening rhythms, as life continued its forward march. Inside, Sophie was helping prepare dinner with some of the other club members, her laughter drifting through windows open to let spring air circulate. Her room waited upstairs, safe, permanent hers. School tomorrow. Friends to see. A future stretching ahead filled with possibility. Carter thought about Maria's letter, about the last thing she'd written: ride free, ride proud. Remember why we wear these colors. The colors represented more than rebellion or danger or the outlaw myth. They represented family and loyalty and the belief that broken people deserve second chances. They represented standing up for truth even when lies were easier. They represented protecting the innocent and punishing the guilty and building something worth believing in. Sophie appeared in the doorway. Dinner's ready. You coming? Yeah. Carter smiled. We're coming. He and Derek headed inside, leaving the deck to darkness and stars. Inside was warmth and light and the sound of family. Inside was home, not the place, but the people, not the building, but the bonds, not sanctuary as location, but sanctuary as love made tangible through showing up and staying present and keeping promises that mattered. Maria's spirit rode with them, still woven into every day, every decision, every moment of choosing right over easy. She was in Sophie's laughter and Carter's patience and Derek's loyalty and the club's transformation from what it had been to what it was becoming. Death had taken her body, but not her impact ended her life, but not her legacy, silenced her voice, but amplified her message. The Iron Skulls gathered around the long table for the evening meal. 23 bikers, one 11-year-old girl, and the ghost of a woman who'd saved them all by refusing to let corruption win. They ate and talked and planned for tomorrow and the day after and all the days that would follow. They were family not by blood, but by choice, bound by tragedy, but defined by how they'd survived it, scarred but healing broken, but mending alive, and determined to honor those who weren't by living lives worth the sacrifice. Outside, 70-plus motorcycles sat silent in the compound lot waiting for the next ride. The metal and chrome and rubber that had brought them through investigation and violence and revelation that had carried them to funerals and confrontations and finally to peace. The machines were just tools, but in the hands of these men they became something more, symbols of freedom and power and the refusal to surrender to whatever life threw at them. Sophie found her place at the table between Carter and Derek, flanked by family, surrounded by love home in the truest sense. She looked at the faces around her, these hard men who'd become her protectors, these warriors who'd become her family, these broken souls who'd recognized a kindred spirit and decided she was worth saving. Tomorrow she'd go to school and learn algebra and read novels and play with friends. Tomorrow Carter would handle club business and make sure the bills were paid and continue the work of keeping the Iron Skulls legitimate and strong. Tomorrow Derek would rebuild trust with members who doubted him and prove through actions that loyalty meant something eternal. But tonight they were just family sharing a meal, remembering those who'd fallen, celebrating those who'd survived, and honoring the promise that had started everything. Don't let them bury me until they know the truth. The truth was known now. The truth was documented and proven and entered into official records that would outlast them all. The truth had cost Maria her life, but saved dozens of others, had destroyed Vic's empire, but preserved the club's soul, had revealed betrayal, but also reinforced loyalty among those who remained. And in the end, the truth had brought them here to this table, this family, this moment of peace, hard-earned and deeply cherished. Not perfect, not without scars, not free from future challenges that would inevitably arrive, but together, united, whole. Maria's promise was fulfilled. Sophie's promise was kept. Carter's promise to both of them to honor their courage to build something worthy of their sacrifice to create family from tragedy was being lived every single day. The Iron Skulls rode on engines, rumbling colors flying Maria's spirit in every mile. They rode for justice and brotherhood and the innocent who needed protecting. They rode for truth and loyalty and the belief that some things were worth dying for, which meant they were definitely worth living for. They rode for Maria, for Sophie, for each other. They rode free.